Hi everyone, and welcome to the course Data Collection from the Internet, an Introduction to Web Scraping. My name is Michael Becerra. I'm at the Department of Communication here at Lund University, and I'm going to do everything I can to get you up to speed with web scraping as fast and as freely as possible. So first, I'd like to say again, welcome to the course. I hope you find it useful and rewarding, whether you're working on an academic project or trying to gather a new skill to apply to industry work. So in order to web scrape, we're going to need three basic and free tools. The first is Google Chrome. You may already have it, but if not, please download it. The second thing that we'll need is a web scraping software. For this course, we're going to use Data-Miner. Data-Miner is a Chrome extension, so once you have Chrome downloaded, you can go to the Extensions tab and download Data-Miner. It's a free program. There are some paid add-ons when you want to take your web scraping to the next level, but for now we're going to be using the basic version of the software. And lastly, you'll need some type of spreadsheet software to put your web scrape data into. So if you have Microsoft Excel, that's great. Otherwise, you can use Google Sheets, which is free. There's no real difference for us because this is just going to be a spreadsheet software to store our data. So Google Chrome, the Data-Miner Chrome extension, and some type of spreadsheet software is all you'll need for this course. So let's talk about the course aims. The first and primary aim, obviously, is to scrape data from the internet. But we'll also need to understand the possibilities and limits of web scraping. Not everything on the internet can be scraped, and we'll talk a little bit more about what is possible in this lecture. We'll also learn the basic structure of a website when it comes to HTML code. Each website is programmed in a coding language. A good majority of websites are coded in HTML, and that's what we're going to learn how to scrape. And we'll have to learn that because we'll need to customize our scrapers to get the data that we want from the HTML code. And this is a very important task if you want to learn how to web scrape different websites, because every website is coded differently. And so you'll need to understand that basic structure of HTML code to be able to go in and grab what you want from the internet. And these introductory themes will become much clearer over the course of these lectures and the course as a whole. But let's start with the basics. What is web scraping? It is a data collection method. It is just something that we use to collect data. It doesn't help us analyze it, but it helps us collect data and put it in a format, a spreadsheet, that we can use to do further analysis. And web scraping has two primary steps. The first is that we're going to download a web page, and then we'll extract data from that web page. So pretty basic. And there's a difference between manual and automated web scraping. You've all already done the manual version. You've downloaded a web page anytime that you've clicked through Google to a web page or you've typed in a URL, your computer has downloaded that web page. And then whenever you copy and paste something off that web page, you've done a manual form of web scraping. So good job. You scrape the web every time you copy and paste something. When you visit a page on your computer or your mobile device, you are downloading that page. And then if you copy something from it, you're extracting that information. So copy pasting is a manual form of web scraping, but we can automate this process with computers. So let's move into automated web scraping. You can think of it like it's copy pasting with software. We tell the software what data we want to copy, and then we paste it into a spreadsheet. And using this automated method, we can collect lots of data very fast. But in order to do automated web scraping, we have to start thinking a little bit like computers. Computers have their own language, their own programming codes, and we need to understand and decode that language a little bit if we want to customize scrapers and really focus in on getting specific types of data from the internet. So every web page is built from code. If we are humans, we might log into eBay, for example, and see a page like this. Let's say we're tired of copy and pasting by hand. We have a pain in our wrist, so we go to eBay to look for a wrist brace. If we log into the website, we will see this type of output on the front end, which is meant for humans. This is all the things around usability and user-friendliness, UX design. They're designed to make web pages easy for humans to understand. That's the front end. But every front-end website has a back-end code. And this is the realm of computers. This is what computers read to show us the front-end web page in the way that it's designed. So if we zoom in, we can always find the information on the front end somewhere in the code on the back end. In this case, if we want to find the price of each item, we can go to the back-end code and we'll see that the 64 and 129 crowns that we see on the front end is programmed somewhere on the back end. And that's what we want to extract. We want to extract data directly from the back-end code. But this code is messy. It's extremely messy, and it differs from website to website. So how do we actually go through and read this code? Luckily, there are tools that help us do this. These are called CSS selectors. And next lecture, we're going to go much more into detail with these tools. But basically, what they do is they help us look at the front and the back end side by side and find exactly on a website what we see on the front end, where is that on the back end. And so most browsers, such as Google Chrome, have a CSS selector built in. So you'll visit the website, pull up the selector, and then kind of walk through the code in the front end side by side until you find out where the information you want on the front end is located in the back end code. And again, we'll do that next lecture. So web scraping really is just the process of finding information on the front end in the back end code, and then telling a software to extract this information directly from the code. And then repeating that process over and over. That's what makes it automated. However, I must warn you at the beginning that things can and will go wrong. So prepare yourself. Web scraping can be a frustrating process, especially in the beginning, because it's difficult to find out where exactly the information you want is buried somewhere in the code. So I like to describe web scraping more as an art than a science. It's a lot of guessing. It's a lot of trial and error. Is this the part of the code that will give me what I want in my spreadsheet? Sometimes you get it on the first try. Sometimes it may take a couple days to format your spreadsheet properly. But no matter whether you're a beginner or an expert, things can go wrong. But the more comfortable you are with code and the better the code has been written. This is an important point, that because each website is developed differently, it depends on the individual programmer or team of programmers who built that website. They may have really put an effort to make the website code readable for humans, or they may have been really busy and just built something on the fly and not left many clues for a human to find where the information is. So it really depends a lot on your skills as a web scraper, but really it's more about how well was that website programmed. Is it easy to read or not? And that will differ from website to website. So it can be a bit frustrating to try to guess and find out where information is in the code. Again, each website is coded differently, so there's not a one-size-fits-all scraper. You will have to build a scraper for every individual website you would like to scrape, and they may be completely different. And this is why this course will include sessions on HTML code and CSS selectors. That's the next lecture. And also a lecture on ethics, which is very important because there are some ethical ways to web scrape. And if you don't follow these best practices, you may be blocked from scraping that web page. And that means that you'll have to get another computer or use a VPN to try to scrape the web page again. But if you don't follow the right ethical steps, you will get blocked. And you won't be able to scrape the page. So this can be very frustrating if you're designing a research project or you've told your boss in industry that you're going to get this data and do something with it. If you ignore ethics, you may face the consequences of being blocked from that website and you won't be able to scrape it. So please view all the lectures before you try to go straight into web scraping. Now, there's also many AI tools that will help you scrape stuff. You can just input a web page and it will deliver data to you. But that may not be the data that you want. And I would say that you may have a 20% chance of getting exactly the data that you want just by telling an AI to do it. But if you want to get the data that you specifically are interested in, you'll need to customize your scrapers. There's just no getting around it. So you'll need a basic understanding of HTML and also using CSS selectors to really be able to customize your scraper and get exactly what you want and not be so reliant on something, a tool that someone else has programmed. But a very important point, not everything can be scraped, and scrapers have two main limits. The first is the depth of a web page on the internet, and the second is the type of web page. Is it static versus dynamic? So let's take the depth of a web page first. The internet is not just one thing. It has different levels of depth. And the top level, which is where we're going to stay with our web scraping, is called the surface web or the clear net. And this is anything that does not require a password to access. So as you'll see from the graphic, you have Google, Bing, Wikipedia. These are things you can just go to the web page and access for free. Many organizations' pages are also on the ClearNet. So if you want to go visit and learn more about an organization, see their news releases, their press releases, things like that, you can just type in the URL and you'll go directly to that web page. The second level, which is the bulk of the internet, is the deep web. This is anything that requires a username and password to access. So your email, for example, is part of the deep web. You type in your password and you get access to sensitive information, which is your emails. If you're a student at Lund University, you have to log into the library's resources to access academic papers, which Lund has paid access for. So, short story is, do not scrape any website that requires a password, because passwords are there for a reason. They are there to give certain people rights and access and keep other people out. It's because behind passwords are things like medical records, legal documents, scientific papers that are not openly accessible to the public. They require a password, they probably require some sort of payment. So if you go and use a password and scrape things that other people don't have access to, you could be in violation of the law. So very important, but also very easy rule to follow is just don't scrape anything that requires a password, because you may get into some legal issues there. And then lastly, just to finish the depth of the internet, there's also the dark web, which requires a specific browser called the Tor browser. And there's a lot of, illegal things on the dark web, drug trading, arms dealing. So we're not going to be, for obvious reasons, going into the dark web and trying to scrape it. So stick to anything that does not require a password, that anyone can just access from a web browser. These are the types of web pages that we'll scrape. So again, just to emphasize, so no one gets sued and thrown in jail from taking this course, keep your scraping to the surface web. That is any website that does not require a password to access, because passwords are there for a reason. They're there to keep people out, and they're also there to keep web scrapers out. So the second limitation of web scrapers is the difference between a static and a dynamic website. So the difference here is in the layout, how it looks, but also in the language that it was programmed in. So we are going to be focusing on HTML, which is how most websites are programmed today. And that's in the realm of static websites. Dynamic websites are programmed with more advanced computer languages, and they offer more advanced features for users when interacting with that website. So it's actually a very easy difference to understand, but let's take a look at what a dynamic page looks like first. This is what we cannot scrape, or at least what we'll not cover in this course. So when you see like the percentage loading, that's a good signal that it's a dynamic page. And we'll see that when we access a dynamic page, it's usually going to allow us to do some type of advanced interactive features. So we're going to slide to plant our seed, and we'll see things that are popping up and moving. There's a running sort of chyron here at the bottom. These are all signals that this is dynamic, right? It's going to be hard to go in and scrape this. Things are popping up at us. So this is what is meant by a dynamic page. It's dynamic. It's doing a lot of stuff. Another example is this website Brag. So it looks, quite basic, but as we start to interact with the website, we'll see that it's doing a lot of dynamic things. And so this is going to be difficult to scrape because there's all of this crazy movement that is going to be difficult to tell a computer we want that information. Right? So these are just some examples of a dynamic page. So let's look at a static website. And once you understand, it's very easy to figure out what a static website is because it has similar patterns that repeat. So if we look at a Google entry, for example, we see it brought us this result, and this result. The title, the picture, and the little description are all in a very similar format. This is a great signal that we have a static page. It's the same thing looking at Lund University's website. So we can see that there are these repeating what are called elements, and we'll talk more about those later in the course. But we'll see that there's chunks of the website that are the same. This is great to tell computers we want this information. And so an element is just a chunk of a web page. So if we look at the Google example, we have 3 elements there. And if we look at the Lund example, we have 4 elements there. These are just building blocks or chunks of a web page that follow a consistent pattern. That's what signals a static website, and that's what's great for scraping, when we find these consistent patterns across a website. So, just to zoom in on the Lund example, here we have an element. And that element has a picture, it has a title, and it has a description. And we'll see that so does another element. Actually, all of these elements have the same format. That's what we're looking for to scrape. And that's when we start to think a little bit like computers. Because we can take each of these elements and format them into a spreadsheet. So we have the URL of the image, the headline, and the content. Maybe you want to pause this video just to kind of look and see how these line up. This is essentially the kind of output that we'll be working with web scraping. So when we're doing this for real, and this is what we're going to work up to in the course, what we'll have is we'll have the front-end web page open, the CSS selector open, and our web scraper open. Those are the 3 elements that we're going to have to work across as we try to identify what we want to scrape on a web page. So that's elements. And here we go back to our example of eBay. We can also see that there are elements here, right? Or wait, this is Amazon. Same idea. There are these chunks of the web page that are consistent across different elements. We can scrape those. And then what we can do is what's called pagination. And so what we're really looking for is, does the website allow us to go from one page to the next? And pagination is the process of scraping each element from a website, going to the next page, scraping again, going to the next page, scraping again. That's what we're looking to do, and that's what static websites offer us. So when you're looking for websites to scrape, what you're really looking for is there a repetitive pattern of elements on the website? And is there a pagination structure? It may be, like here we see 1 to 7, but it may also be A to Z or something else. But we want to find websites that have repetitive patterns on the front end and have some type of page structure that we can loop through and then scrape, next page, scrape, next page, scrape. So here's just another example. This comes from an NGO website, and we'll see that there is a page structure, and we'll also see that there are repeating patterns in the news stories that they publish. So again, scrape that, next page, scrape that, next page. Now, there are two different sort of forms of indexing a website. We just went over pagination. There's also what's called infinite scroll, which I'm sure you're familiar with. When you scroll down a web page and then more content loads, scroll down a web page, more content loads. Infinite scroll is much more difficult to scrape because we have to tell the scraper to move down, activate new content, move down, activate new content. And there are ways to do this, but it requires more advanced forms of web scraping. So we're not going to cover infinite scroll in this course. So when you're looking for websites that you can scrape with these freely available tools, and for what you'll have to do for your exam in this course, look for a website with pagination, not infinite scroll. If the website has infinite scroll, or if it's dynamic, for the purpose of this course, we will not scrape that. Because the free tools that we have they're not very good for scraping these websites, and it's going to cause a lot more frustration. Web scraping at a basic level is really built for simple websites with a repetitive structure and also offer pagination. And this is actually quite a large number of websites. So it's not that we can't scrape much, it's just that we are limited to these types of websites, static with pagination. So within static websites, there's two genres or categories of pages that we're going to cover in this course. And the first is a list page. So this is a type of page that lists content over and over, right? We've kind of been through some examples. If we click on this list page, it will bring us to what's called a details page. So this is usually behind the list. So this usually gives us more details. If you go to a news website, you'll see a bunch of links. When you click those links, you're going to go to a story, and that story is a detail page. It's focused on one item from the list. So we're going to cover these more in detail when we get to the scraping tutorial, but just so you know, you're going to have to build two different scrapers to get the list and then get the details, if that's what you're interested in. But the good news is that details pages often follow a similar pattern. So if we think about the elements here, each of these detail page has a title, it has a picture, it has some text that we can grab, and we only have to build one scraper to pull this information from each detailed page. So if we look at lists and we look at details pages, we need to build one scraper for each, but that's it. Because we want to build a scraper to pull the list, and then we want to build a scraper to pull each individual details page. But they're usually programmed in the exact same way, the details pages, and that means that we only have to build one scraper, and then we can just go visit each detail page and use our scraper to pull that information. So the sort of full web scraping process is that we would pull all the information or extract the information out of our list, and then for every item in that list, we would download the details page. And so you can imagine if this organization has 100 items in the list, then we could download the list, and then we'd have a row in our spreadsheet for every single details page. And you can see how the data might start to expand very quickly, especially when we paginate across the list. So I know I'm using a lot of big words here, but the process is actually quite simple. Build a scraper for the list, build a scraper for the details page, and then automate the process of pulling the data that we want into our spreadsheet. So what type of websites are scrapers good for? What type of use cases? Well, they're great for collecting data that is formatted in similar ways. And that's why we want to stick with static websites that are a little bit more simple and repetitive. These are perfect for scraping data. And what types of websites are these? Well, these are things like blogs or forums, right? You put a post and someone replies, and there's usually information like the author, the date, the text. That's great for scraping. Think about something like Flashback or in Sweden or Reddit. Repetitive content that we can gather. Things like products and customer reviews, right? There's a star rating, there's an author, there's a date, there's some text. It's repetitive, we can scrape that. Press releases, news stories from organizations, financial statements can be on the ClearNet and easy to scrape, and also public records, things like for example, law cases or legal cases that are in the public domain, that you can just go to the court and look at the title of the case, the date, the judge. Sometimes these are openly accessible, depending on the country, and you could scrape those quite easily. Anything where there's a standard repetitive format on the website. So pretty much most static web pages, that's the basic building block. You maybe don't think of that as a user, but once you start to look at web pages in terms of what can be scraped, you'll see that they usually have this kind of block chunk layout, which is an element, and we can scrape those elements. And so, just to give you a little bit more context, web scraping is not the only method for data collection. So, the social media platforms, for example, if we're a researcher and we want to get data from these platforms, web scraping is going to be very, very difficult because many social media platforms try to block web scraping. Instead, what they do is they allow researchers or other people who are interested in getting the data direct access through what's called an API. And that way you can download large amounts of information directly into a spreadsheet. But the problem is that with all the privacy scandals around Cambridge Analytica and disinformation, most of these APIs have been blocked for research use. And so most people who are interested in collecting data from the internet are actually moving over to web scraping. It's an older method, but one that is becoming more and more popular today. So it's good to know how to do it, but it's also good to know that it's not the only method of data collection, but it's probably the most easy to learn how to do without getting specialized into programming, and also can be quite effective for building a research project or building a data set to analyze for some other purpose as well. So there's also different ways to actually conduct web scraping. We've already talked about the manual copy and pasting. We are going to use Dataminr, this Chrome extension, and there are more advanced ways using open source programming languages like R or Python. And there's kind of a logic here where these steps get more difficult. There's a bigger learning curve to use each one of these. And as you overcome that learning curve, you get more customizability, and you have the opportunity to download more data. But we are going to use Dataminr because it's a good balance. It's relatively easy to get started with quickly. It doesn't require any super specialized programming language. And if you decide that Dataminr isn't enough for you, and you want to use web scraping a lot, then it's worth learning one of these computer languages, but then you're looking at a couple months of practice. So we are going to start with the basic version that should get you up to speed quickly, but also we'll have some limitations in terms of what you're allowed to do. But to summarize, web scraping is essentially an automated form of copy-paste, and it can collect lots of data by pagination, by going from page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and scraping all the elements along the way. When we're asking for information from a web page, when we're trying to extract it, we're going to be interacting with the back end of the website. And that's important because it's a little bit more difficult than just pointing and clicking the front end. Again, scrapers need to be custom built for each web page. And sometimes, if you want to get a list versus the details behind the list, you're going to have to develop 2 scrapers just for one website. So it does take time to build each of these scrapers, but hopefully over this course you'll practice enough that you'll be able to take the skills here and apply them to different types of static websites. And understanding a bit of HTML code really helps you in this process of building scrapers. And we're going to turn to that next. So next lecture, we'll talk about how to use a CSS selector. We'll look at the basics of HTML code, and then we'll get on to web scraping. Thanks for listening.